In the dark corners of the galaxy, the Xoreth Empire held an unshakable power. Their fleet, vast and unyielding, had crushed civilizations across many star systems. The Xoreth were feared by everyone. Their ships were unstoppable, and their command ruthless. No one had ever dared to challenge them. The galaxy had long been under their control, and they believed that nothing could ever break their dominance. But one day, something changed. It started with a small, unnoticed signal, so faint that at first it was dismissed as interference. The Xoreth military systems were used to dealing with countless false alarms. Ships arrived daily, transmissions from all corners of the galaxy, all of them insignificant. But this one was different. It was short, encrypted, and filled with strange patterns. A transmission like no other. A junior officer at the command center, Lieutenant Vel, was the first to notice it. At first, he thought it was nothing more than static, another mistake in the complex network of interstellar communications. He almost ignored it. But then, something about the signal caught his attention. It was a rhythmic pattern, too structured to be random. He pressed a button on his console, zooming in on the signal. The usual patterns were absent. The interference seemed intentional, like someone was trying to get through, but their message was masked. As he studied the encryption, a single word started to form, one that sent a chill down his spine. Humans. It was a simple word, yet it carried so much weight. Vel sat back, startled. Humans. He muttered under his breath. He had never heard of them before. The galaxy was vast, but there were no records of a species by that name. Surely, this was just some error, a mistake. But the more he analyzed the signal, the more he realized this wasn't just a random transmission. It felt purposeful. "Lieutenant Vel, are you still on task?" A voice from behind him interrupted, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Captain Vorn, a senior officer known for his quick temper. I'm sorry, sir," Vel stammered, quickly minimizing his console. "Just a small anomaly. I'll have it sorted." But Vel couldn't shake the feeling that something important was happening. He knew the Xoreth command was uninterested in minor disturbances. They would dismiss it like they had with every other piece of insignificant data in the past. But something told him that this was different. He decided to take matters into his own hands. A few hours later, while the rest of the command center was busy with routine operations, Vel began to dig deeper into the signal. He isolated the transmission from the galaxy's usual noise and started working on decoding the encrypted message. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but the more he worked, the clearer it became. This was a warning. The signal contained coordinates, and they pointed to the outer edge of the Xoreth Empire. A fleet was approaching. A fleet of humans. Vel didn't fully understand it, but the message was clear enough. A fleet was moving toward the Xoreth Empire, and they were preparing for something. But what were they preparing for? Could these humans be the first species to challenge the Xoreth? He sent a message to his superior, General Khan, hoping for guidance. The general, an old and experienced commander, would know what to do. Vel's hands trembled as he hit the send button, but the feeling of dread had begun to settle deep inside him. Minutes later, Vel received a curt response. "Dismiss it. It is nothing." The words stung, but Vel wasn't ready to let it go. There was something in the transmission that disturbed him. It wasn't just a warning. It felt like a challenge. Unable to shake his growing unease, Vel continued tracking the signal. The coordinates pointed toward a distant system, far beyond the reach of the Xoreth's immediate surveillance. Vel realized that whoever, or whatever, was sending this message, they were getting closer, and they were getting ready to do something. As he traced the signal, a horrifying thought crossed his mind. What if this wasn't just a warning? What if this was the beginning of something much larger? Something that the Xoreth Empire, with all its power, could not control. Just as Vel was piecing together the final parts of the transmission, he received a new order from General Khan. The order was brief and blunt. "Cease your investigation. Report to the main command immediately. Vel hesitated for a moment before quickly shutting down his console. He knew the Xoreth were always prepared for anything, but the nagging feeling in his gut told him that they were not prepared for this. As he stood up and turned to leave, he heard a strange noise, like a faint whisper. It was coming from his console. Slowly, he turned around and walked back. He looked at the screen, and his heart nearly stopped. There, in the final line of the decoded message, were the last words that would haunt him forever. Humans are coming. Before he could process what this meant, the transmission cut off. The screen went black. In the blink of an eye, Lieutenant Vel's world changed. The Xoreth Empire, so confident in its dominance for centuries, had just received its first real warning. The humans were coming, and they were not prepared for what was to come. The silence that followed Lieutenant Vel's transmission was deafening. The galaxy had always moved at its own steady pace, and the Xoreth Empire had never once felt threatened. Their massive fleet had wiped out enemies with ease. Nothing had ever stood in their way for millennia, and they ruled with an iron fist. Yet here was this strange, encrypted transmission that spoke of a threat unlike anything they had ever known. Humans are coming, it said. A challenge. A warning. But to the leaders of the Xoreth Empire, it was nothing more than a glitch, a trick of the system. General Khan, the battle-hardened commander of the Xoreth fleet, sat in his high command center, scoffing at the report Vel had sent. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair as he listened to the transmission for the second time. The words repeated in his mind. Humans are coming. It didn't make sense. He had never heard of them. No records, no intelligence. Just this strange message. Lieutenant Vel, you've wasted my time, Khan muttered as he waved off the concern. His eyes narrowed as he glanced over the galaxy map projected before him, marking the route where the signal had come from. Far beyond the outer rim of Xoreth-controlled space, that was where the signal originated, a distant region filled with unknown systems. The outer rim, Khan thought, the backwaters of the galaxy. Nothing of importance. He dismissed it as quickly as it had come. The Xoreth Empire had encountered unknown species before, and each time they simply obliterated them. Why would this be any different? The Xoreth had their armada, their technology. They had conquered worlds far and wide. They were untouchable. Who were these humans to change that? In a cold, calculated tone, Khan sent an order to Lieutenant Vel to cease any further investigation into the transmission and to report immediately to the main command center. We have more important matters at hand. Khan's message said, return to your duties and forget about this. Human nonsense. Meanwhile, Vel, though shaken by the order, couldn't bring himself to comply. The image of those final words, humans are coming, burned in his mind. He could not simply ignore it. The thought that someone, could challenge the Empire like this troubled him deeply. He had seen enemies come and go, but this felt different. As he sat in his quarters, Vel stared at the encrypted signal again. His eyes traced the coordinates once more, trying to make sense of it all. The more he thought about it, the more he realized the danger of dismissing the signal. If the message was legitimate, this human species might already be far closer to the Xoreth than they realized. But what could he do? He was just a junior officer. The Xoreth military was vast, and their leadership was set in its ways. He felt powerless. His hands trembled as he sent another private message to a trusted ally, a fellow officer named Tessa. If anyone could help him understand this, it would be her. Do you think the humans are real? He asked in the message. What if they are the threat we've been waiting for? Tessa's reply came quickly. It was short but filled with concern. I don't know, Vel, but something doesn't sit right with me. Be careful. But no matter how much Vel tried to dig deeper, the higher-ups had already moved on. General Khan continued to focus on matters of more immediate concern, preparing for more routine operations, making sure their dominance was never questioned. To Khan and the rest of the Empire, this was just another anomaly, another blip on the radar. The truth, however, was that the Xoreth were completely unaware of what was approaching. The humans were not some simple blip in the galactic map. They were a force moving with purpose, with their eyes set on something much larger than anything the Xoreth could have imagined. Days passed, and the Empire continued its operations, confident in its supremacy. But in the background, Lieutenant Vel refused to give up. He watched the coordinates carefully, knowing that if something wasn't done, they would be blindsided. No one else seemed to care. The Empire had no idea how close they were to the edge of something they couldn't control. Then the day arrived when Vel's worst fears were realized. The signal, so faint at first, became clearer. It was coming from the same coordinates. But now, it wasn't just one transmission. It was multiple signals, all pointing to the same place. The humans weren't just coming. They were organizing, preparing for battle. The realization hit Vel like a tidal wave. The Xoreth Empire was about to face something they had never prepared for, something that had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. And that moment was now. With a deep breath, Vel sent another message to General Khan, but this time, he knew it wouldn't make any difference. The response he received was the same, dismissive, uninterested. Prepare for battle as usual. We have no time for fantasy. Vel's heart sank. The humans were coming, but no one believed him. The Empire had no idea what was coming for them. In the shadows, the first steps of the human fleet began to take form. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Xoreth Empire's dismissal of the human threat would soon prove to be their greatest mistake. For days, the Empire had ignored the signals, believing them to be nothing more than a strange anomaly. But the humans, a species that Xoreth thought they could easily disregard, were growing closer with each passing moment. Lieutenant Vel could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His concerns, his warnings, were being disregarded. The Empire's superior arrogance had blinded them to the reality of the situation. No one seemed to care, but Vel knew the truth. There was a storm brewing on the horizon, and the Xoreth were unprepared. The tension in the command center grew thick as Vel continued to track the mysterious signals. The fleet was moving, faster now. The encrypted transmissions were more frequent. Each message carried a chilling sense of inevitability. The humans were on their way. Vel had tried to alert General Khan again, but his reports were met with the same indifference. "Focus on your duties, Lieutenant." Khan's response echoed in his mind. "This is nothing. There are no humans out there." But Vel couldn't ignore the signs. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The humans weren't a mere blip on their radar. They weren't just some unknown species that could be brushed aside. Then came the moment that changed everything. It started with a faint signal, a pulse. It wasn't much, just a burst of static, but it sent a shiver down Vel's spine. He quickly ran a scan of the coordinates. The pulse was coming from the outer rim, right where the humans had been heading. But this time, there was something different about the signal. It wasn't a simple transmission. It was a clear, deliberate warning. The words echoed through Vel's mind, the same phrase he'd heard before. Humans are coming. In a desperate attempt to gather more information, Vel issued a command to activate the Empire's defensive systems along the outer rim. His heart raced. The humans were not just approaching. They were preparing for something. Vel could feel it in his bones. They were preparing for war. Then, in the quiet of the command center, a chilling realization swept over him. The Empire had no idea how advanced the humans were. No one knew what they were capable of. The humans were an unknown quantity, and the Xoreth were too proud to take them seriously. Suddenly, the faint signal turned into a series of rapid pulses. Something massive was on the move, and it wasn't a fleet of small ships. No, this was something far bigger, a weapon, a warship, a force of nature in its own right. Vel's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the screen. The signature of the human warship was unmistakable. The Xoreth Empire was not ready for this. They were not prepared for the kind of devastation this new species was capable of. The first shot rang out. A massive burst of energy surged across the galaxy's edge, striking one of the Empire's outer defense stations. The explosion was catastrophic. The station was obliterated in an instant, its debris scattering into the void. Vel watched in shock, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. A single shot. One single attack, and that Xoreth had lost one of their most advanced defense stations. The Empire's first real taste of the human threat had come, and it was devastating. Vel's message to General Khan was urgent, almost frantic. "Sir, the humans." But once again, Khan's response was cold and dismissive. "We've dealt with this before. Vel, return to your duties." But this time, Vel couldn't stand by and watch. The humans had crossed into their space, and now they were striking. They were a force unlike any that Xoreth had ever faced, and Vel knew it was only the beginning. The battle was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. In the distance, the human warship, an enormous, formidable vessel, loomed. It was not alone. More ships were coming. More warships. More destruction. The Xoreth had no way of knowing how many were on the way. But it didn't matter. They had underestimated humanity. And now, they were paying the price. General Khan finally took notice of the attack, but it was too late. The humans had already made their move, and their fleet was on the way. The Xoreth military had to scramble to organize a defense, but it was clear they were caught off guard. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were about to experience the full force of what humanity could do. The first clash between the Xoreth and the humans had begun, and it was nothing like what the Xoreth had ever imagined. As the battle raged on, Vel's heart pounded in his chest. He had tried to warn them. He had tried to tell them that the humans were coming. But now, all he could do was watch as the Xoreth Empire was thrown into chaos. In the chaos of war, one thing became clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. The chaos was undeniable. The Xoreth Empire, for all its might and control over the galaxy, was faltering under the weight of a threat they had not prepared for. The first clash had rattled them, but it was only the beginning. As the human warships descended upon their outer defense line, the reality of their unpreparedness hit hard. Lieutenant Vel, despite his warnings, now found himself in the heart of a nightmare. The Xoreth military had scrambled to counter the unexpected assault, but it was clear they were losing ground fast. The human ships were unlike anything they had ever seen, sleek, powerful, and relentless. The Xoreth fleet had been designed for dominance, built on centuries of experience in conquering weaker civilizations. They had never faced an enemy like this. The human ships weren't just weapons. They were strategic, efficient, and most terrifying of all, they were organized. The first human strike had been devastating, but now the true scale of the threat became clear. The human warships were not just attacking. They were systematically dismantling the Xoreth defenses, one by one. Shields, weapons, and stations all fell in quick succession. It wasn't the overwhelming numbers of the humans that made them so terrifying. It was their precision. They knew exactly where to strike, and they did so with a terrifying level of coordination. Each ship in the human fleet seemed to know its role, attacking from multiple angles, hitting the Xoreth where they were weakest. Vel had never seen anything like it. He had watched as Xoreth warships were torn apart by the human fleet. The enemy's technology was unlike anything the Xoreth had ever encountered. Energy weapons blasted through shields like they were paper, and the human ships seemed to anticipate every move the Xoreth made. How are they doing this? Vel muttered to himself, his mind struggling to comprehend the level of strategy and precision the humans displayed. In the heart of the battle, the human warship that had delivered the initial blow seemed to be at the center of the storm. Its size was enormous, dwarfing most of the Xoreth ships. But it wasn't just its size that was terrifying. It was its presence. It moved like a living creature, avoiding incoming fire with unsettling agility. The ship's energy signature was unlike any other, glowing with an intensity that seemed to surge with every shot fired. General Khan, who had once dismissed the threat, now found himself desperately trying to organize a defense. But his commands fell on deaf ears. The Xoreth were in disarray. Their once dominant fleet was being torn apart, and they were unable to keep up with the humans' rapid advances. Dispatch reinforcements. Khan barked into the comms, but the message came too late. The reinforcements, scattered across the galaxy, couldn't arrive in time to save their forces from the human onslaught. Vel's heart pounded as he watched the scene unfold. The Xoreth had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. His mind raced as he tried to think of a solution, but all he saw was destruction. The humans weren't just invading. They were conquering, and the Xoreth were powerless to stop them. The human fleet continued to advance, each ship maneuvering with a terrifying sense of purpose. The humans were relentless, pressing their advantage at every turn. It was clear now that they had come to take what they wanted, and nothing would stand in their way. As the battle raged on, the Xoreth fleet was decimated. Their ships fell like dominoes, each explosion more devastating than the last. And amidst the destruction, Vel realized something even more chilling. The humans weren't just winning. They were toying with them. The human warships were circling the Xoreth fleet, cutting through their ranks with ease. It was a horrifying spectacle. The Xoreth had fought wars before, but this was something entirely different. The humans weren't just fighting. They were teaching the Xoreth a lesson in power and determination. Vel could see the fear in the eyes of his comrades. The once proud warriors of the Xoreth Empire were now running for their lives, unable to comprehend how they had been so thoroughly outmatched. The humans had crushed their defenses, shattered their fleets, and now they were closing in. And then, in the midst of the chaos, came a new message, a transmission from the human flagship. The message was short but unmistakable. The humans had only one goal in mind. "We are coming for the heart of your empire," the message echoed across the void. "Prepare yourselves, for this is just the beginning." Vel's blood ran cold. He had known that the humans were a force to be reckoned with, but now he realized the full extent of their power. They weren't just invading. They were systematically destroying the Xoreth Empire, and nothing would stand in their way. The battle was not over, not by a long shot. But Vel knew that it would take everything the Xoreth had to even stand a chance against the unstoppable force that was humanity. The Xoreth Empire was in chaos. Their once indomitable fleet was now a wreckage of burning ships and shattered defenses. The humans, relentless and unyielding, had cut through their forces with surgical precision. The very core of the Xoreth military was beginning to collapse, and the heart of their empire, once thought to be impenetrable, was now in the sights of the humans. General Khan stood at the helm of his command ship, staring out into the void. His eyes were bloodshot, his mind numb with the weight of defeat. The battlefield was strewn with the remnants of Xoreth ships, their once proud forms now reduced to smoldering husks. The humans had taken everything. "General, the human flagship is moving towards the core world," a nervous officer reported. His voice trembled with fear. "They're coming for the heart of our empire." Khan's mind raced. The core world, the capital of the Xoreth Empire, was the seat of their power, the very foundation of their dominance. If the humans reached it, the entire empire would collapse. There was no room for failure, no second chance. "We can't let them reach it," Khan muttered under his breath. He turned to his officers, his face set in a grim determination. "Prepare the fleet for a final stand. We will defend our capital at all costs." But as Khan issued his orders, another transmission came through, this time directly from the human fleet. The message was simple but chilling. "We're coming," the voice on the other end said, cold and matter-of-fact. "And nothing will stop us." The transmission cut off as quickly as it had come. Khan's heart sank. They were relentless, unyielding. The Xoreth had underestimated them, and now it was too late to reverse the tide. As the human fleet advanced toward the core world, their movements were methodical, precise, and utterly terrifying. The Xoreth had no way of stopping them. Each attempt to slow their advance was met with swift and brutal retaliation. The humans didn't just win. They crushed the Xoreth's every effort to resist. The humans had come with a purpose, and that purpose was clear: the complete annihilation of the Xoreth Empire. It wasn't about conquest. It wasn't about subjugation. The humans were here to end the Xoreth's reign, and they would stop at nothing to achieve it. Khan, once so confident in his empire's might, now stood at the precipice of destruction. His forces were scattered, his fleets shattered, and the Xoreth capital was within the grasp of an unstoppable force. In the distance, the human flagship loomed, a colossal vessel that seemed to eclipse the stars themselves. Its energy signature was like nothing Khan had ever seen: vast, unyielding, and filled with a quiet power. It was a symbol of the terror the humans had wrought, and now it was headed straight for the Xoreth heart. "They're here," Vel, who had once warned his commanders about the humans, muttered. He had witnessed the devastation firsthand, and now he stood alongside Khan, helpless to do anything to stop it. "Prepare the final line of defense," Khan ordered, his voice hoarse with desperation. "We'll fight until the end. We can't let them destroy everything." But even as Khan spoke, he knew it was too late. The humans had already proven that they were capable of tearing apart everything the Xoreth had built. The last-ditch efforts of the Xoreth military seemed insignificant in the face of such overwhelming power. The final showdown was imminent. The Xoreth, cornered and broken, had no choice but to face the full might of the human onslaught. The moment of truth was upon them. As the human flagship closed in on the capital, the Xoreth fleet braced for the inevitable. It wasn't just about defending their home anymore. It was about survival. The very future of the Xoreth Empire depended on what happened next. The silence was deafening. The human ships moved in like a tide, overwhelming the remaining Xoreth forces with ease. Their weapons fired in unison, tearing through the Xoreth ships in a blaze of destruction. It was a massacre. Khan and Vel watched, helpless, as the final remnants of the Xoreth fleet were obliterated. The heart of the Empire, the seat of their power, was now on the verge of being taken by the humans. In the distance, the flagship's weapons glowed, and with one final devastating barrage, the capital world's defenses crumbled. The humans had done it. They had broken the Xoreth Empire. And now, the galaxy would never be the same again. The Xoreth capital world, once a shining beacon of imperial power, now lay in ruins. The once imposing skyscrapers and grand citadels were nothing more than charred rubble, their once proud spires bent and broken. The heart of the Xoreth Empire was now nothing more than a lifeless husk, smoldering under the relentless assault of the humans. General Khan stood at the shattered ruins of the Imperial Command Center, his face drawn and pale from the long battle. The once unshakable empire he had sworn to protect was crumbling around him. There was no escape, no retreat. The humans had torn through everything the Xoreth had built, and now they were poised to claim victory. "We can't hold them off any longer, General," Vel said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Our forces are scattered, and our last line of defense is shattered. The humans have already breached the capital's outer walls." Khan's eyes narrowed as he looked out over the burning city, the distant sound of explosions echoing in his ears. The humans had done it. They had defeated the Xoreth at their own doorstep. The relentless barrage of human firepower had reduced the once great empire to dust. And now, it was only a matter of time before the final blow was struck. "Where is the Emperor?" Khan asked, his voice sharp with urgency. The fate of the entire empire rested on the Emperor's decision now. He needed to be found. The Emperor was their last hope, their final symbol of power. "We've lost contact with him," Vel replied. "We don't know where he is, but the humans are closing in on the royal palace. It won't be long before they take him too." Khan clenched his fists, his thoughts racing. The Emperor was the last line of defense, the final figurehead of the Xoreth Empire. If they lost him, the Xoreth would have no one left to rally behind. The humans would win, and the galaxy would fall under their rule. We can't let them get to the Emperor, Khan muttered. Prepare the remaining forces. We'll make our stand at the palace. Despite the defeat that hung heavily in the air, Khan's resolve remained unshaken. He would fight to the end, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. He would not let the humans destroy everything the Xoreth had built without a fight. The human fleet was closing in, their ships moving with terrifying precision. The sheer might of their forces was overwhelming. The Xoreth were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched. But Khan refused to back down. "We'll hold them off for as long as we can," Khan said, his voice steely. "We will die fighting, and we will take as many of them down as possible." As Khan and Vel led their remaining forces to the palace, they could see the human ships looming overhead. The humans were everywhere, on the streets, in the air, and on the walls. They were taking control of the city, and there was nothing the Xoreth could do to stop them. The final battle was upon them. The Xoreth had fought long and hard, but in the face of humanity's relentless advance, their strength had finally given way. The humans had shown no mercy, no hesitation. They were here to claim victory, and nothing was going to stand in their way. The royal palace, once the symbol of Xoreth's greatness, now stood as a crumbling monument to their downfall. The humans were closing in on the Emperor, and there was nothing the Xoreth could do to protect him. In the final moments of the battle, Khan stood at the gates of the palace, staring at the human forces gathering before him. He knew that this was it, the final stand. It would be a battle to the death, but even in the face of certain defeat, Khan felt a strange sense of peace. That Xoreth Empire was finished, but they would go down fighting, their pride intact. The first human soldiers breached the gates, their weapons raised high. Khan and his forces stood tall, ready to make their final stand. The battle was over, but the legacy of the Xoreth Empire would never be forgotten. The humans had claimed their victory, but the Xoreth had fought valiantly to the very end. As the humans pushed forward, Khan's last words echoed in his mind. "The Xoreth may fall, but we will never surrender." With that, the last remnants of the Xoreth Empire fell before the unstoppable might of humanity. The galaxy had been forever changed, and a new era had begun. The dust had barely settled over the remains of the Xoreth capital when the humans made their final move. Their fleet, once seen as a mere threat on the horizon, had arrived and made their presence known across the galaxy. With the fall of the Xoreth Empire, the galaxy stood at the precipice of a new era. A new order was on the rise, and humanity had claimed its place at the top. General Khan's body lay still on the scorched earth of the royal palace, his final breath long since drawn. The last remnants of his people were scattered, their empire reduced to rubble. The Xoreth, for all their power, had been undone by one force: humanity's relentless will. The human fleet hovered above the planet, their ships casting long shadows over the broken city below. The once proud capital, now a heap of burning ruins, was a silent testament to what had come before. The Xoreth were gone, but their legacy, of conquest and tyranny, remained etched in the scars of the galaxy. However, with the defeat of the Xoreth, a new power had emerged: humanity. "We've won," Captain Holt said as he stood aboard the flagship, looking down at the destroyed world below. He had seen the horrors of war, the destruction that came with it, but this felt different. This wasn't just a battle, it was the end of an era. His voice was steady, but there was a certain weight in his words. Humanity had done the impossible. They had taken down one of the most powerful and ruthless empires the galaxy had ever known. And now they stood victorious. "It's not just about winning, Captain," Lieutenant Carver replied from across the command deck. "It's about what comes next. We're not here to conquer, we're here to lead." The Xoreth were a cautionary tale. Their empire fell because they thought they could rule the galaxy through fear and domination. We're not like them. We're here to rebuild. The two officers stood in silence for a moment, their eyes on the view outside. The once imposing fleet that had belonged to the Xoreth now belonged to humanity. Their ships were no longer the feared symbol of destruction. They had become the vessel for a new hope, a new beginning. "We'll help the galaxy rebuild," Holt said after a long pause. "We'll ensure that the mistakes of the Xoreth aren't repeated. We'll make sure that no one else suffers the way they did." The humans weren't just the victors in this war. They were the architects of a new future. They had shown the galaxy that, even in the face of the most powerful empires, there was hope. Humanity had come from a small, distant planet, and they had taken down the galaxy's most feared conquerors. But they weren't here to destroy. They were here to offer something more. The lessons of the past, the lessons from the Xoreth, were clear. Empires built on fear and oppression were doomed to fail, but empires built on unity, cooperation, and strength were destined to rise. The message was clear, and it was being broadcast across the galaxy. The humans were here, and they weren't going anywhere. On the planet below, survivors of the Xoreth's long reign began to emerge from their hiding places. They watched as the human forces set up camp and began to restore order to the ravaged city. For the first time in centuries, the Xoreth subjects saw a different kind of leadership, one that promised peace, rebuilding, and a future where they could stand on equal footing with the rest of the galaxy. A representative from the surviving races of the Xoreth Empire approached Captain Holt, his eyes filled with skepticism, but also a glimmer of hope. "Are you really here to help us?" he asked cautiously. Holt met his gaze without hesitation, his voice firm but kind. "We're here to help rebuild, not to rule. This is your galaxy too. We'll stand with you, but we'll never dominate you." The man looked at Holt, his expression softening. It was a difficult thing for a people who had known nothing but domination to grasp. But as the dust settled and the world began to heal, the truth was becoming clear. The humans weren't like the Xoreth. They didn't come to take. They came to give. They came to offer something different. The fleet, with its countless ships, stood ready. They would help rebuild the shattered worlds, restore peace, and create a galaxy where all species could coexist. The Xoreth had ruled through fear, but the humans would rule through unity and strength. A new day had dawned. In the following weeks, messages from the human fleet spread across the galaxy. They promised protection, peace, and an end to the endless wars. The Xoreth had shown that conquest and fear led to destruction. Humanity, however, was determined to prove that compassion and cooperation were the true path to strength. The human flag flew high over the ruins of the Xoreth capital as the sun rose on a new era. The galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had arrived, not as conquerors, but as leaders. The once feared species from a distant world had proven their worth, and now they were ready to guide the galaxy into a new age of peace and prosperity. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of humanity, and it had learned a valuable lesson. A force built on fear can only destroy, but a force built on hope can create a new future. And the humans, with all their strength, creativity, and resilience, would be the ones to lead them into that future.